Hello friends. Today's story is of Man-Eater of Jowlagiri from the Kenneth Anderson's book. Those who have been to the tropics and to jungle places will not need to be told of the beauties of the moonlight over hill and valley, that picks out in vivid relief the forest grasses and each leaf of the giant trees, and throws into still greater mystery the dark shadows below, where the rays of the moon cannot reach. Concealing perhaps a beast of prey, a watchful deer or a lurking reptile, all individually and severally in search of food. All appeared peaceful in the Jowlagiri forest range, yet there was danger everywhere, and murder was afoot. For a trio of poachers, who possessed between them 2 matchlocks of ancient vintage, had decided to get themselves some meat. They had cleverly constructed a hide on the sloping banks of a water hole, and had been sitting in it since sunset, intently watchful for the deer which, sooner or later, must come to slake their thirst. The hours wore on. The moon, at the full, had reached mid-heaven. And the scene was as bright as day. Suddenly, from the thicket of evergreen saplings to their left, could be heard the sound of violently rustling leaves and deep-throated grunts. What could be there? Wild pig undoubtedly. A succulent meal, and flesh in addition that could be sold. The poachers waited, but the beasts, whatever they were, did not break cover. Becoming impatient, Muniappa, the marksman of the trio, decided to risk a shot. Raising his matchlock, he waited till a dark shadow, deeper than its surroundings, became more evident, and fired. There was a snarling roar and a lashing of bushes, followed by a series of coughing hoofs and then silence. Not pigs, but a tiger. Fearfully and silently the 3 poachers beat a hasty retreat to their village, there to spend the rest of the night in anxiety as to the result of their act. But morning revealed that all was apparently well, for a male tiger just in his prime lay dead, the chance shot from the ancient musket having sped straight to his heart. So Muniappa and his friends were, for that day, the unsung and whispered heroes of the village. But the next night produced a different story. With sunset came the urgent, angry call of a tigress seeking her dead mate. For it was the mating season, and this tigress, which had only just succeeded in finding her companion the night before, was decidedly annoyed at his unaccountable absence, which she quite rightly connected with the interference of human beings. Night after night for a week she continued her uneasy movements, calling by day from the depths of the forest and in darkness roaring almost at the outskirts of the village itself. Young Jack Leonard, who was keen to secure a trophy, and who had been summoned to the village by an urgent letter, arrived on the morning of the 8th day, and acquainted himself with the situation. Being told that the tiger wandered everywhere, and seeing her many pug marks on the lonely path to the forest bungalow, he decided to try his luck that evening, concealing himself by 5 o'clock behind an ant hill that stood conveniently beside the path. The minutes passed, and at 6:15 p.m. dusk was falling. Suddenly there was a faint rustle of leaves and a loose stone rolled down the bank a little to his right. Leonard strained his eyes for the first sight of the tigress, but nothing happened. The minutes passed again. And then, rapidly moving along the edge of the road towards him, and on the same side as himself, he could just discern the form of the tigress. Hastily transferring the stock of his rifle to his left shoulder, and leaning as far out from his sheltering bush as possible, so that he might see more of the animal, Leonard fired at her chest what would have been a fatal shot had it carried a little more to the right. As it was, Leonard's bullet plowed deeply into the right shoulder, causing the beast to roar loudly before crashing away into the jungle. Bitterly disappointed, Leonard waited till morning to follow the trail. There was abundance of blood everywhere, but due to the rocky and difficult country, interspersed with densely wooded ravines and close, impenetrable shrubbery, he failed to catch up with his quarry. Months passed, and the scene changes to Sulakunta, a village deeper in the forest and about 7 miles from Jowlagiri, where there was a little temple occasionally visited by pilgrims from the surrounding region. 3 of these had finished their devotions and were returning to their home, a man, his wife and son aged 16. Passing under a wild tamarind tree, hardly a quarter mile from the temple. The boy lingered to pick some of the half-ripe acid fruit. The parents heard a low growl, followed by a piercing, agonized scream, and looked back to see their son carried bodily in the jaws of a tiger, as it leapt into a nullah bordering the lonely path. The aged couple bravely turned back and shouted abuse at the marauder as best they could, only to be answered by 2 more shrieks from their only son. Then all was silent again. Thereafter, death followed death over a wide area, extending from Jowlagiri in the extreme north to the cattle pen of Gundalam, 30 miles to the south, and from the borders of Mysore state, 20 miles to the west, to the main road to Denkaflakota, for about 45 miles of its length. Some 15 victims, including 3 girls, 1 just married, had fallen a prey to this monster. When I received an urgent summons from my friend, the sub-collector of Hosur, to rid the area of the scourge. Journeying to Jowlagiri, where the sub-collector had told me the trouble had begun, I pieced together the facts of the story, deducing that this was no tiger but a tigress, and the one that had been robbed of her mate by the poachers and later wounded by Leonard's plucky but unfortunate shot. From Jowlagiri I tramped to Sulakunta in the hope of coming across the fresh pug marks of the marauder. But I was unlucky, as no kills had occurred at that place in recent days, and what tracks there were had been obliterated by passing herds of cattle. Moving on to Gundalam, 23 miles away at the southern limit of the affected area, I decided to pitch camp, since it was at this cattle pen that the majority of kills had been reported. 7 herdsmen being accounted for in the last 4 months. 3 fat buffalo calves had been very thoughtfully provided as bait by my friend the sub-collector. I proceeded to tie them out at likely spots in the hope of securing a kill. The first I tethered a mile down the river bordering Gundalam. At that time of the year a mere trickle of water at a point where the river was joined by a tributary named Sigihala, down which the tigress was reported to keep her beat. The second I tied along the path to the neighboring village of Ancheti, 4 miles away. The remaining calf I secured close to the watershed, whence both herds men and cattle obtained their daily supply of drinking water. Having myself attended to the securing and comfort of these 3 baits, I spent the next 2 days in tramping the forest in every direction, armed with my .405 Winchester, in the hope of picking up fresh pug marks, or perhaps of seeing the man-eater herself. Early in the morning of the 2nd day, I located the footprints of the tigress in the soft sand of the Gundalam River. She had descended in the night, walked along the river past the watershed and my buffalo bait, which, as was evident by her footprints, she had stopped to look at but had not even touched, and up and across a neighboring hill on her way to Ancheti. Here the ground became too hard for further tracking. The 3rd morning found me searching again, and I had just returned to camp, preparatory to a hot bath and early lunch, when a group of men, accompanied by the headman of Ancheti, arrived to inform me that the tigress had killed a man early that morning at a small village scarcely a mile south of Ancheti. Apparently a villager, hearing restless sounds from his penned cattle, had gone out at dawn to investigate and had not returned. Thereafter his brother and son had followed to find out the cause of his absence, and at the outskirts of the cattle pen had found the man's blanket and staff, and, indistinct in the hard earth, the claw marks of the tigress's hind feet as she reared to attack her victim. Being too alarmed to follow, they had fled to the small village and thence to Ancheti, where, gathering strength in numbers and accompanied by the head man, they had hastened to find me. Foregoing the bath and swallowing a quick lunch, we hastened to Ancheti and the small village. From the spot where the tigress had attacked, and as was evident by the fact that no sound had been made by the unfortunate man had killed her victim, tracking became arduous and slow, owing to the hard and stony nature of the ground. In this case, the profusion of thorny bushes among the shrubbery assisted us, for, on casting around, we found shreds of the man's loincloth impaled on the thorns as the tigress carried him away. Had the circumstances not been so tragic, it was instructive to learn how the sagacious animal had endeavored to avoid such thorns and the obstruction they would have offered. Some 300 yards away she had dropped her burden beneath a thicket at the foot of a small fig tree, probably intending to start her meal. Then she had changed her mind. Or perhaps been disturbed, for she had picked her victim up again and continued her retreat towards a deep watercourse that ran southwards towards the main Kaveri River, some 30 miles away. Thereafter, tracking became easier, for the tigress had changed her hold from the man's neck and throat. This had accounted for the lack of blood spoor. Now she held him by the small of his back. Drops of blood, and smears across the leaves of bushes and thickets, now made it comparatively easy for us to follow the trail, and in another 100 yards we had found the man's loincloth, which had completely unwound itself and was hanging from a protruding sprig of thorn. Continuing, we reached the watercourse where, in the soft dry sand, the pugs of the tigress were clearly imprinted, with a slight drag mark to one side, evidently caused by one of the man's feet trailing downwards as he was carried. As there was no need of a tracker, and numbers would create disturbance. Apart from needless risk, I crept cautiously forward alone, after motioning to the rest to remain where they were. Progress was of necessity very slow, for I had carefully to scan the heavy undergrowth on both banks of the watercourse, where the tigress might have been lurking, waiting to put an end to her pursuer. Thus I had traversed 2 bends in the watercourse when I sighted a low outcrop of rock jutting into the watercourse bed itself. Keeping as far as possible to the opposite side of the rock, I increased the stealth of my approach. Closer scrutiny revealed a dark object on the far side of the rock, and this duly proved to be the body of the unfortunate victim. The tigress had already made a fair meal, having consumed about half her prey in the process, severing one leg from the thigh and one arm. Having assured myself that she was nowhere in the vicinity, I returned to the men, whom I summoned to the spot to help construct some sort of place where I might sit up and await the return of the assassin to its gruesome meal, which I was confident would be before sunset that day. A more unsuitable spot for sitting up could hardly be imagined. There was a complete absence of trees on which a hide or macan. A macan is a raised platform used in tiger hunting could be constructed. And it soon became evident that there were only 2 possibilities. One was to sit close to the opposite bank of the watercourse, from where the human victim was clearly visible. The other was to ascend the sloping outcrop of rock to a point some 10 feet above the bed of the watercourse, where a natural ledge was formed about 4 feet from its upper edge. The first plan I rejected, as being too dangerous in the case of a man-eater, and this left me with the prospect of sitting upon the rock ledge, from where I could not only view the body of the dead person but the whole length of the watercourse up to its bend in the direction from which we had come, and for about 20 yards in the other direction, where it swung abruptly to the right. Working silently and quickly, at a spot some distance up the watercourse, whence the sound of lopping would not be heard, the men cut a few thorny branches of the same variety as grew in the immediate vicinity of the rock, so as not to cause a contrasting background. These they deftly and cunningly arranged below the ledge, so that I would not be visible in any direction from the watercourse itself. Fortunately, I had had the forethought to bring my blanket, water bottle and torch, although there would not be much use for the last of these during the major portion of the night, as the moon was nearing full and would rise comparatively early. By 3 p.m. I was in my place and the men left me, having been instructed to return next morning with a flask of hot tea, and sandwiches for a quick snack. The afternoon wore slowly on, the heat from the blazing sun beating directly on the exposed rock and bathing me in sweat. Looking down the watercourse in both directions, all was still and nothing disturbed the rays of shimmering heat that arose from the baked earth. Absence of vultures could be accounted for by the fact that, in the position the tigress had left it beneath the sharply sloping rock, the body was hidden from the sky. About 5 p.m. a crow spotted it, and by its persistent cawing soon attracted its mate, but the 2 birds were too nervous of the human scent actually to begin picking the kill. Time wore on, and the sun set as a fiery ball beneath the distant rim of forest-clad hills. The crows flapped away, one after the other, to roost in readiness on some distant tree in expectation of the morrow, when, overcome by hunger, they would be more equal to braving the feared smell of human beings. The cheering call of the jungle cock broke forth in all directions as a farewell to the dying day, and the strident maa of a peacock sounded from down the dry bed of the stream. I welcomed the sound, for I knew that in the whole forest no more alert watchman than a peacock could be found, and that he would warn me immediately of the tigress's approach, should he see her. Now was the expected time, and with every sense intently alert I awaited the return of the man-killer. But nothing happened. The peacock flapped heavily away and dusk rapidly followed the vanquished day. Fortunately the early moon had already risen and her silvery sheen soon restored a little of my former range of vision. The birds of the day had gone to roost by now, and their places had been taken by the birds of the night. The persistent chuck-chuck-chuckoo of nightjars resounded along the watercourse, as these early harbingers of the night sought their insect prey along the cooling banks. Time passed again, and then a deathly silence fell upon the scene. Not even the chirrup of a cricket disturbed the stillness, and my friends, the nightjars, had apparently gone elsewhere in their search for food. Glancing downwards at the human remains, it seemed that one arm reached upwards to me in supplication or called perhaps for vengeance. Fortunately the head was turned away, so that I could not see the frightful contortion of the features, which I had noticed earlier that afternoon. All at once the strident belling of an alarmed sombre broke the silence and was persistently followed by a succession of similar calls from a spot I judged to be about half a mile away. These were followed by the sharp cry of spotted deer, and echoed up the watercourse by a restless brain fever bird in his weird call of brain fever, repeated in rising crescendo. I breathed a sigh of relief and braced my nerves and muscles for final action. My friends, the night watchmen of the jungle, had faithfully accomplished their task, and I knew the tigress was approaching, and had been seen. The calls then gradually died away. This meant that the tigress had passed out of the range of the callers and was now close by. I strained my eyes on the bend to the right, 20 yards down the watercourse, around which, at any moment, I expected the man-eater to appear. But nothing happened. 30 minutes passed, then 45. By the hands of my wristwatch, clearly visible in the moonlight,